been offering or started companies that really traverse the whole range of how to actually offer these smart contracts and these new participatory tools safely to consumers. So I'd love for you guys to just take a few minutes to introduce yourself, tell the audience what you guys have been working on, and provide your definition of a smart contract.
Hi, I'm Aaron Wright. I'm a professor at Cardozo Law School. My academic research has been increasingly focused on blockchain technology, and more particular kind of in the smart contract realm. I also have advised a number of companies in the space, also in particular with regards to smart contracts and other kind of second level applications for blockchain technology. Definition. So, I mean, I think the cleanest definition, the first reference to smart contracts is actually in a 1997 paper by Nick Szabo, who some people also credit as being the person that invented Bitcoin. And I think that his definition is really the best. And it's just a way, a smart contract is a way for a party or a machine, which is an important point, to reach an agreement as to a commercial transaction of some sort. So I think that that's probably the cleanest and the best, and it frankly comes from the source of maybe everything.
Well said. I'll defer to Aaron on that. So we're all going to agree that Nick Szabo is probably the king on that. I'm Pamela Morgan. I am an attorney at Empowered Law. But I've lately been scaling back because I'm also the CEO of Third Key Solutions. And Third Key Solutions is a company that focuses on helping companies create and implement custom and robust multi-signature solutions. So we work with exchanges, we work with wallets like Case Wallet, we work with startups like CoinSimple to implement corporate governance using multi-sig and to secure their keys. We also work with companies to provide auditable corporate governance structures. And that lends itself to my third role, which recently I accepted a position on the board of directors of the Canadian nonprofit C4. Some of you may be familiar with their work. It's the Cryptocurrency Certification Consortium, and they head up the CBP, which is the Certified Bitcoin Professional and Certified Bitcoin Expert exams. But what I'd really like to talk to you about is the CCSS standards. So there are currently some cryptocurrency security standards that are open for public comment, and we can talk more about those later if you'd like.
Hi, I'm James Smith. I'm the CEO of Elliptic. Elliptic helps companies who are working with Bitcoin, firstly on the custody side and key management, and secondly on transaction monitoring to identify whether your transactions that are incoming are connected to crime or anything else that you might be concerned with. Previously, I was a computer science PhD and then a derivatives trader. When I talk about smart contracts in this space, I think the way I'm generally thinking about it is it's a program that's running on a shared ledger, such as the Bitcoin blockchain, and that program needs to be able to respond to outside events and also maintain some internal state. And it needs to have the authority to be able to control the ownership of assets on that ledger.
Hi, my name is Matt Slater. I'm the CEO of a company called Hedgy. We are doing blockchain-based derivative contracts right now, exclusively doing forward contracts. We help Bitcoin miners, businesses, remittance companies hedge against the fluctuating price of Bitcoin. In terms of a smart contract, I would also agree that Nick Szabo probably is the best definition. But I'd say at this point it's become quite generalized. It encompasses a lot of different things. So in that sense, you could classify it as a contract in which the terms of the contract are executed and enforced by some form of a machine or software rather than an entity or a human.
Hi there, it's Grigg here. I've been building cryptocurrency software for about 20 years, and in this particular context, I was the one who created what we call the Ricardian contract, which is the way we take a prose or legal document and we hook that up to a cryptocurrency. So if you're in the business of issuing a new cryptocurrency, you want to describe what that currency is to your users so that they can be certain about the nature of the thing they're playing with. And the way to do that is to write out what it is you're doing and describe the various techniques you use to govern that contract. And this is an invention that's out there and is being used by a bunch of different players in the space, OpenBazaar, Common Accord, and various others. When it comes to smart contracts, they're quite closely related to legal contracts, of course, and the interesting thing there is that the smart contract, which in my view, can best be seen as a machine with money. If you take a standard vending machine, it's a machine that handles money. Now we're talking about a code machine, a piece of code, a program. It's a program that can handle money. Now, the interesting question about that is we do know how to program. We know how to build these pieces of code. We've been doing it since forever. That's what these computers are all about. This time we have a program which is to use the metaphor from the first presentation, we have a program that is running on a network of unreliable, untrusted computers acting as one computer. This program can now handle money. As we enter into the use of this particular program, we are now entering into a contract. It's just by the nature of our agreement of using this particular process, we are entering into an agreement. So it becomes very interesting how you establish what that agreement is, where it's written down, and so forth. So hence the interesting part for me is how we take a legal written prose contract and tie it to the smart contract or the piece of code and put them all together into a package that allows users to be certain about the actions and certain about the meanings of what they've just done.
Casey Kuhlman, I work for a company called Eris, as you may have heard on the last panel. We do permission smart contracts machines. My definition of smart contracts perhaps differs from some of the other. I would define it as cryptographic execution of code over cryptographically verifiable data.
Wow, so all experts, all with varying definitions. I want to ask a question of those who are actually offering products now in the space. Who have you found that are actually now using your products, or what needs are these serving? I mean, cryptographic contracts have been around for some time. What is really new and novel about this executable code on a distributed ledger that is actually servicing a need in this space?
I think I'll go with Matt here.
Sure, I'll start. So at Hedgy, like I mentioned, we're working with a lot of Bitcoin miners that have price risk. So they know how much Bitcoin they're going to mine, but they don't know the price. Traditionally, you could sell through a futures exchange, but a lot of these contracts are done bilaterally. So they're taking on counterparty risk with customers that they know. And so they're very hesitant to take on these contracts with buyers that they don't know. Using a smart contract, at least the way we do it, using multisig, they're able to have us serve as a third key in a multisig transaction and be able to do all the risk mitigation using the smart contract. So there's many times less counterparty risk, especially when you use margin deposits. And now, as you could call it the third key of that contract, we also have limited risk in what we can do. So we're not in custody of the Bitcoin. We're not a central party in that traditional sense. So in terms of counterparty credit risk, that's a huge benefit for our customers.
Yeah, I think to follow on from that, every Bitcoin transaction involves a very simple smart contract in a way. Each time you send some Bitcoin to someone, whether it's to a single signature address or a multi-signature address, you're basically writing a piece of code and saying, this is how the next person will redeem these coins. So protection of ownership of those assets all comes down to how you manage the private keys. So security is very important in this industry. The levels of security to which people go are much higher than you'd expect from what are essentially a bunch of startups. So we started in that area by protecting keys for corporates who are handling this. So it's typically been hedge funds and CFD companies and traders who have wanted to use our product on that side. And now on the data analytics side, we're helping people identify the chains of ownership through which these smart contracts have helped the ownership pass, so that you can be a bit more clear about where you're accepting bitcoins from. And if you're a business that takes regulation seriously, you might care about the provenance of the coins, and so we help people understand that a bit better.
So I can maybe give a little more context outside of Hedgy, just of the types of things that are emerging right now, and some that you can expect over the next 6 months. So Hedgy is actually at the forefront with forwards, but there's also other options that are being generated. There's a decentralized prediction market called Augur. There's various other ones, and they're using smart contracts to A, create the market itself, and B, to actually execute the transactions, the options. So a prediction market enables you to predict an event pick an event in the future, and then basically trade in order to develop a probability of that event's occurrence. So that's kind of one application is in the financial realm, is really with options. A second one is really with currencies exchanges. So the Ethereum blockchain, which we talked about this morning, makes smart contracting easier. It has a number of languages. There's also an emergence of middleware that makes it very easy to develop and write smart contracts. So another application with Ethereum is a decentralized exchange called EtherX, which enables you to exchange one cryptocurrency for another, although the long-term goal is to expand it into fiat currencies and other currencies as well. Another one is Lighthouse. So one of the Bitcoin core developers, Mike Hearn, has developed a crowdfunding platform, which looks very similar to Kickstarter and enables you to set a campaign, and then you can get pledges from other people, and if you hit your campaign, then it automatically executes. So all these, at least with these first three systems, they're all very similar to what we have right now. The difference is that there's no centralized party at the middle. So for an exchange, if you're an exchange operator, the fact that you're technically, could be technically irrelevant, or you're pointing towards that direction, could be kind of concerning. If you're a regulator who regulates exchange, that should be concerning as well. If you're a company like Kickstarter, the fact that your matchmaking functionality is technically getting eliminated too, you need to really think about whether your value is the curation of those projects that you're doing, or it's the technical functionality that you're bringing about. I think the other area where we're starting to begin to see the applications of smart contracts is really around the creative space. So there's an interesting project called Streamium, which basically allows people to use smart contracts to be paid on a per-second basis for viewing a video online. So let's say you wanted to stream a classroom of some sort. You could get paid on a per-second basis by various people over the internet in a secure way, in an automatic way. And this kind of points towards a future where where smart contracts enable the use of micro transactions. And if you look at Walter Isaacson and various other from the Aspen Institute and various other people, you can begin to see interest in the use of micropayments in order to incentivize the creation of content online. And sorry that this is a bit long, but the last application is really in the corporate governance setting. So again, on Ethereum, there's a project by a programmer named Nick Dodson, who is beginning to use blockchains and smart contracts to resemble the recording functionality for boardrooms. So you can invite a group of people together. You can decide you can invite people together. You can make a proposal on a certain corporate event. That proposal gets recorded onto a blockchain. You now have a permanent record of it. Then the people in the group can vote on it. That vote gets recorded into a blockchain. And if a majority is hit, then the smart contract gets executed automatically, and you have record of that corporate action. So really mundane things, which if you're a lawyer, you have to deal with in court, of just kind of creating these paper trails of corporate actions. You're beginning to see a future where it can actually point towards an automation of that process.
Eris, Casey, you want to talk little bit about what Eris is doing?
Sorry?
Do you want to talk a little bit about what Eris is doing and what kind of
No.
users you're onboarding?
We don't really talk about our clients, but in general, we're in the space which actually, I must defer to Houman because he basically gave the talk that we give. I mean, we're in the business of process automation for large corporates, and so it's sort of it falls under there that it's a little bit difficult for me to talk about. But in general, our focus is on the efficiencies that come from increasing verifiability for distributed organizations that we generally know as multinational corporations. Particularly, we're focused on mainstream financial institutions at the beginning.
Actually, so across at least some 3 of the companies on this, what I find really fascinating about this, all of these discussions around trustless architecture, is the extent to which new issues of trust and safety and security come up. So, for example, with Hedgy, you reduce counterparty risk. You're able to enter into a contract knowing that contract will be executed. You reduce the depository risk, the custodial risk of having a rogue custodian with your funds, and you allow people for the first time to do things by themselves. And then you're seeing companies like Third Key Solutions, where now that within this participatory network, more and more people have greater responsibility to hold their keys, to manage their funds, to do their diligence when they're enabling these services and applications. So, and then you've got Elliptic, who has built up a very successful startup based around the basis of providing trust, of holding keys, of holding actual funds themselves. So it's actually really interesting to see where the locus of trust and responsibility and risk falls along these different networks where folks can do more things by themselves than ever before, but it raises interesting new governance procedures. I'm curious, where do you guys see kind of the core value proposition? Where are you seeing kind of the user comfort in managing their funds and participating in these networks? And then also from Houman and Erin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this changes the locus of where regulators and policymakers really see their role in these decentralized networks, because it raises consumer protection issues as you expand access to services, but then at the same time, it raises governance issues in being able to manage what individuals can now do for the first time by themselves. So take it away.
I think for us at Third Key Solutions, we work with clients and we do exactly what you just mentioned, Constance, which is we talk with them and find out, where are you at on the spectrum? Are you the person who is valuing privacy over everything else? Do you want to hold your own keys? Do you want to diversify the risk? We talk about geographic and jurisdictional diversification of keys. So for some of our clients, we work with them to ensure that there is, in fact, jurisdictional diversity. Others want to have all of their keys held in the U.S. And so we work with clients individually to help them implement multi-sig. And just as a quick primer, for those of you that are unaware of what multi-sig is an account. It's a special type of address that's created by combining more than one private key. So what you can do is you can take these keys and put them together, and you can create an M of N signature plan. What that means, so in our typical banking world, we have something like a joint bank account, right, where 2 people can be signers on the same account. The risk there is that either one of the signers can drain the entire account. So with multi-sig, we can create 2 of 3, 3 of 5, et cetera, all the way up to 15, where we require more than one signature to release funds. And so with that tool, we can then create these really robust schemes where we can have, for example, on a capital account for a small business, we can have an investor be a signer on the account as well as the CEO, as well as a backup key. And we can require 2 signatures or 3 signatures to release funds. And that way, that encourages communication within the organization. So we see additional protection for investors by ensuring the appropriate governance, by ensuring that the funds are actually locked with a number of different signatures.
Yeah, I think in terms of the question about regulation, I think, so smart contracts, I mean, what a dull subject, right? But if you actually think about the way we've conceptualized a lot of market-based economies, they really fundamentally root down into contracts. So If you know Ronald Coase's work, I mean, really what corporations, large entities are doing are lowering transaction costs. And right now, we have the first time the ability to really use digital contracts to do that. And what that means is as the ability to create smart contracts becomes easier and easier, and I'm telling you, it's becoming easier and easier, especially as alternative blockchains like Ethereum come on board, and as middleware it becomes available to make it easy to program these types of contracts. You're going to begin to see them get bundled up into big chunks of software. And those big chunks of software are going to replace certain centralized organizations like markets, people who make markets, exchanges. But it can extend beyond to that. It's going to begin to be increasingly used and explored to enable people to organize their affairs online. And we're going to begin to see the emergence of new types of entities that do not look like corporations. They look like something different, something new, something that can really only be brought about in a digital environment. And those organizations will bring with it a huge amount of efficiencies. So right now, if you go, Facebook has been able to accumulate billions of people to go onto their online services. Most corporations cannot scale to that level. But when you move to things that are completely digital in nature, we can actually begin to see organizations that are huge. I mean, it's not inconceivable in 20, 30 years down the line that we would have these decentralized organizations that have, scores and scores and scores of people in them that are across the globe, that aren't bounded by geography, and that are potentially running in an autonomous way through code. And if you begin to think about the way we've structured our laws over the past, 100+ years, our focus has been on, well, if there's a centralized entity, that's a great place for us to place regulations. That's the lowest cost way for us to effectuate some sort of regulatory policy. And that's going to be increasingly difficult to do when that centralized point or thing is no longer a person, it's a piece of software. So you're basically, you're going to lose that middleman in order to place regulation. And I think that it's going to, A, require a lot of coordination on the part of different governments to start to deal with these things, and B, it's going to place a lot more pressure at lower level actors. So the end users, we're going to think it's natural to look to them in order to place limitations. And then you can place even further limitations down the pipe, the internet stack. So you can begin to apply more regulations onto ISPs, like the UK has done to certain instances to deal with things like copyright infringement, and even probably lower than that, maybe minors on the network. So I think we're starting to begin to point over the next 5 to 10 years to kind of a new paradigm where we're going to begin to see new emergent digital organizations that have exceptional amounts of scale, and that are going to begin to start taking off some of these larger centralized organizations that we've been accustomed to over the past 100+ years. I mean, we're moving away from a paper-based to a digital economy, and it's going to bring a lot of the challenges that we've begun to see in the first wave of the internet with intellectual property and copyright into other markets. So I think there's going to be a lot of tough questions that emerge from that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we've been working on as a group is actually trying to define what kind of legal wrapping, what kind of real-world enforcement and procedures and processes we need in place to deal with the automation that's coming, to deal with the fact that smart contracts may be negotiating our relationship with the things around us, the people we interact with in very complex and invisible ways. So, something that we've been working on are what kinds of rights and duties attached to a distributed or autonomous organization. Do we need to have a last reachable person? What kind of organizational structures or governance would follow such a distributed, totally autonomous organization? And, actually I'm very interested to hear what Grigg might have to say, because Ricardian contracts were one of the first, I think, cryptographic, digitally signed, contracts available. Actually, if you look at Nick Szabo's writings as well, he points to some of the issues that might arise in the implementation of smart contracts. On one hand, it promises the potential for people in a participatory way to reduce the barrier for enforcement of conditions, to prearrange things that are executed. On the other hand, it requires a certain fluency in code. It requires that there's a certain usability issue there. There's also the issue that the contract is de facto performed. Factually ambiguous situations might be difficult to render in a smart contract. How have you found kind of the expression of law in code and matching what they call the real world, the RL, and the digital world? And once we have these algorithmic structures that govern the way things happen in the real world, what have you found in the tension in translating law and code?
That's a tough question. I'm not sure I can solve your problem space there, but yeah, the issue is one of complexity in that we know that code can do wonderful things and it can keep doing wonderful things and it can keep automating processes, but code has bugs. And people have bugs in them too. They can keep working on a particular process, but then they can misunderstand the process. We have users and consumers coming in and they can misunderstand the process. At the end of the day, smart contracts and code in general works some percentage of the time, and we hope that's a high percentage of the time, but there are failures, and what happens at that point of failure is what essentially drives the economics that gives you the profit at the end of the day. So if you have a very low percentage of failure, you're doing well, but even if you have a very low percentage of failure, if those failures cost you a lot of money, you're not going to have a successful solution. And the way we resolve this in human terms is that we back off to dispute resolution. When there's an argument, we need to resolve a dispute. And you can then distinguish smart contracts, if you like, between those that have some form of dispute resolution and those that do not. So if you're going out onto the net and you're dealing with unknown counterparties, you get what you get. You put your money into the machine and it either comes out or it doesn't, and that's your risk. But serious businesses and people with lots of money to risk are going to want something a bit better than that. They're going to want to back off and have dispute resolution. And at that point, you then have to start examining everything that's going on around the contract. And I think what is going to happen is that the more successful businesses, the more successful processes will figure out the way to create these code snippets that are going out onto the blockchain and ally them to the writings of a contract. It doesn't have to be a difficult contract. It doesn't have to be a complicated thing. It doesn't have to be a 300-page derivative thing. But it does have to give you just the basic elements of how you resolve those disputes. And this is already something that various players have experimented with. For example, and perhaps now I need to hand over the baton, with Eris, there is a possibility whereby you can post a written contract into a smart contract. So now I should ask you to explain that.
Sure. It's my idea and Primavera's idea and your idea of Ricardian contracts. My idea of what I call dual integration and Ricardian contracts, I think, are at a remove definitely very similar. Primavera and I have talked about this as well. And the rough idea is if you want to gain the efficiencies that you can get from computable contracts, but you still want to have the certainty of being able to go to a court, then you need to have some mechanism in which you can properly link a coded contract or computable contract, whether that is running on some sort of a blockchain mechanism or some sort of other system, to a written contract that a judge can understand. And for the foreseeable future, it's highly unlikely that you could take a pure set of code to a judge and gain reliable enforcement. So the real simple way to do it is to deploy your computable contract to gain some unique identifier of that, depending on whatever the system is that you're in. If you're in a smart contract blockchain, then you would take the particular ID of the blockchain along with the particular address of the smart contract. Then you would finalize the legal contract by integrating the administrator of the data as the computable contracts idea that Houman was talking about before. Computable contracts generally have been, within legal theory, theorized as state machines that sort of say where we are along the sequence of this transaction. So once you have that unique identifier within a legal contract, which you can actually take to the court, then you simply take the hash of that file and send a transaction to the smart contract and say, hey, basically my overlord in the legal realm is this contract. And at that point, you have perfectly unique and perfectly precise linkages between the computable side, which can be used to gain the efficiencies of the administration, along with the certainty that you can get from a legal contract. So it's possible in a lot of systems, and this is something that we intend to make very easy, and we do currently make very easy. But it's not limited to the Eris platform. It's more of an idea than anything else.
Well, before we open it up to audience questions, I have one last one, which is we've seen various applications of smart contracts, blockchains for companies to be able to manage their own offices, OTC markets that suddenly are safe and secure with Hedgy. We've got Elliptic that's offering storage and security and risk management for these decentralized technologies. Third Key Solution is also allowing users to safely manage, backup, and preserve and segregate their access to their funds. And then we have good explanation of how this may change banking. Our entire infrastructure changes, the way we conduct our commerce and lives online. Which sector do you think is most ripe for penetration right now? And how far are we from, in this example that I hear all the time of how we've lost $1 trillion sending aid to Afghanistan that were supposedly meant for schools, roads, buildings, infrastructure, that no one knows where that money went to. How far are we from having a kind of auditable trail in which we could use smart contracts to manage accountability of funds in that way?
So I think that the biggest impact of smart contracts is not going to be with human-to-human interaction. It's going to be machine-to-machine interaction. The one example of smart contracts, which we didn't talk about, was IBM and Samsung's Adept project. So you can look it up online. IBM used an Ethereum blockchain and various other peer-to-peer and encrypted messaging systems so that your washing machine can decide that it's empty and order new detergent for you. It sounds really, really simple, and it was a demo to prove it. But that machine is operating autonomously. It's making decisions without your input. And that is going to be increasingly needed as we move to an automated world. Google just had a self-driving car drive around the United States, 1.7 million miles, 11 minor accidents, none of which were its fault. In 15 to 20 years, we're going to have automated machines all over the roads, at least in the United States, hopefully the rest of the world. And those machines are going to need to talk to each other. And frankly, they just can't, they're going to need to contract with each other. And they can't read paper contracts. They're going to need a digital contract in order to do that. And smart contracts are going to be the glue that does that. And that's why you're seeing IBM, you're seeing Samsung. If you look at what Intel and they're hiring cryptographic engineers, and they're doing that because they know that blockchain technology, or they have a decent suspicion that blockchain technology provides a backbone to enable the mass coordination of machines. And I think that's really where we're going to begin to see broad adoption. I'll give you an example. There's a company called Filament, and what they do is they use various sensors to build a mesh network where these sensors can talk to each other to kind of improve industrial processes. So you want to know what the heat is at a specific part of your farm. You can now get a sensor to do that, and maybe then you take different actions. You apply a little bit more water here, you apply a little less water where it's shady, so you can optimize your farm. Well, in order to facilitate that and to have the various machines in a farm that's necessary, they're using a blockchain-based solution. They're going to be using a blockchain to meter the data that transmits across the mesh network. They're going to use a blockchain to make sure that these machines can communicate with each other in a secure way. And this is really going to be the future, and I do think it's ultimately the biggest application for blockchains and smart contracts in general.
I was just going to say, so one question is enforceability of all these things, including enforceability, I think, of the machine-to-machine agreements or contracts, and would the machines be suing each other, or more specifically, is there...
The lawyers are hoping so, yes.
Yeah, the lawyers are hoping so, but then probably they'll have an automated lawyer, which is the problem. But I think more seriously is just sort of automating dispute resolution and having, if this happens, then we'll resolve it this way, and essentially, it's not even a, quote, dispute so much as it's just another state that we're in, and we'll resolve it that way.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of dream, is to get everything automated, and these grand visions of where we could be in 20 years are fantastic, and I do buy into them. But there are a lot of small steps on the way, and I think as we get used to using this sort of technology, and slowly transition from where we are today to that grand vision in the future, you have to carefully manage trust and risk and so on along that path. And that's what a lot of companies are trying to do in this space at the moment, including Elliptic. But it's going to be a step-by-step process, and we haven't got anywhere close yet to testing these ideas in the courts and seeing how contracts hold up. So it's still quite a way away. I think in terms of industry, where I think it's going to be applied first, I would expect it will be on financial contracts, whether that's derivatives contracts or something else in the banking world. There's a lot of attention being paid to that area already by both people in the blockchain industry and also people in the financial industry looking at how they can apply this technology.
One thing, if I could add, just to get back to the idea of the money has been, $1 trillion has been lost in Afghanistan. And just to identify that blockchains are a subset of a larger trend of increasing transparency within our system. I mean, that problem that you identified will not be solved by a blockchain. It will be solved by 8 organizations continuing to adopt an international standard called IATA, which is just an open data framework, which has been agreed by most of the large donors. And generally, it's more of a usage problem than it is an increasing verifiability problem. So while a blockchain may be able to add a little bit of certainty onto an already existing open data framework, we have to think of the data management system as a whole and look at the systems a little bit more holistically.
Yeah, I think I would agree with most that complexity is a very difficult problem. And if you look at losing $1 trillion in Afghanistan, that's a really difficult business problem to solve. You don't want to get into the business of that, and you don't want your blockchains to be, shall we say, touted as the solution to that. You need to go much more simple. And I'll just quickly go out on a limb and say that the simple problem that strikes and is easily understandable by pretty much everybody in the room is crowdfunding. We know how to do crowdfunding. It's a very simple problem. We collect all this money together in a pot, we wait some time, and then we have a decision to make. We either return all the money because it didn't reach a number, or we send the money onwards to a beneficiary because it did reach the number. It's a very simple problem, and if smart contracts are going to achieve anything, I think it's going to be in that area, or similar very simple problems which we all know how to do. It's just that it's a little bit complicated because of the actors involved. Remove the actors, stick it into a machine, and then you might see some results. So the systems to watch here are probably Lighthouse working on the Bitcoin blockchain, but I also suspect that Ethereum, because it's making a big play for an open public smart contract specialist blockchain, will be coming out with crowdfunding solutions, which will therefore give you the ability to see a highly complicated smart contract system work. That would be the system to watch.
So we're going to open it up to further questions. Actually, tomorrow we have a really interesting presentation by Michael Pollan, who is going to be doing a presentation on how he's creating architectural buildings using biomimicry that are self-sustaining for the environment, that are crowdfunded through blockchain. So having a huge capital project of that sort that's really funded by people in a way that's sustainable for the world. So I hope you guys are here for that tomorrow. And if anyone has any questions, we'll take them now.
Well, it's not even a question. I believe it's more of understanding that we are civil law countries. We come from Spain, and all that you said, and I have spoken with Constance maybe and with other people, is how we're going to make this match. Because in common law countries, you can do things like back-to-back contracts that you can't do in civil law countries. And there are lots of issues here today that you go over that, like jurisdictional enforcement and banks becoming approximately a DAO, and how the governments are going to deal with it. So I see here a huge gap between what's happening in the common law countries and what's not happening in the civil law countries, and how we're going to make this happen. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody else from any other civil law countries here, but it's a huge thing here. We just don't know how to deal with that. We have to kill the notaries, we have to kill the registers, and everybody else along the way to have a machine, making a smart contract between themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
this is just the nature. This is the nature of code, right? Code is, if it's out there and its technology is marching in a certain way, we can't stop it, right? The only question is how can
I agree. That's why I'm here.
How can we maintain it? I come from a common law system, thank you, the UK, and so I can't really fully speak to that. But I can say that one thing that I do find interesting, if you really start to push and think of the endpoints of this, is that it will be possible, I think, over time, as these systems become more integrated, to actually implement laws, civil laws, through a smart contract. So you can imagine, we're going to live in a world that people are anticipating where there's trillions of devices that are connected to the internet. That means you can control every single thing in your house using code. And you can begin to imagine controlling locks, controlling access to certain things. So this is sounds futuristic, but in Spain, in March, Johnny Walker, Diageo, the great distillery company, they just came up with a bottle that knows when it's opened. So you can buy it from them. They use sensors. It knows when it's opened in your house. How hard would it be for them to put a little lock on it? How hard would it be for a government to then say, you need to program a piece of code into that says if that person's under the age of 18, they can't open that bottle. Well, these are the instances where you can actually start to not just take that areas where it's really clear, which are really simple, everybody gets it. Kids who are under 10 shouldn't drink, and we can actually encode it in a really rigid way, and that could potentially have a huge efficiency.
I'll give an example. 4 years ago, I was in a court case about software, and the judge didn't know what source code was. So source code, she didn't even know that. So I couldn't laugh, but I would about that. So we won the injunction and lost the case. So that's the kind of situation that we have, and how to explain this to the people who are actually bearing the law is fantastic. It's like I don't know.
Absolutely. The civil law case, civil law situation versus common law is a big problem, but I think you can actually, you can rest a little bit easier, because even when we go across to the common law side, we don't necessarily have all the solutions. And if you take, for example, a UK resident talking to a US resident, where is the jurisdiction? Which side of the Atlantic are we on? And it gets very complex there. So you've got the very simple solution that everybody who's playing in a particular blockchain is locked into a particular country. That's often what is done by big internet companies. They start out with one jurisdiction and they say everybody comes into our jurisdiction. But there is another solution which has emerged, and I suspect will emerge in this context, and that is the arisal of a specialist jurisdiction purely for the purposes of entering into a particular blockchain's smart contracts, which is to say we all come together and agree by contract that we're going to do our own dispute resolution, and we're going to appoint our own arbitrators to solve these problems. And this will be handled by a network of players which come together all under the same contract, and we simply do it ourselves, if you like. So what will happen is, instead of going to court in Spain, we'll go to arbitration. And that arbitration will be run...
That's what I wrote down here, arbitration, mediation as well.
Yes, because it is the solution that crosses the borders. It's not solving the civil law versus common law problem, it's solving the you're over there and I'm over here problem, which is the dominating problem.
I completely agree with that, and I think that's also goes to the technical piece. So to the extent that regulators, if it's unregulatable, and/or regulators or courts are slow, technology has an ability to fork. I mean, it's basically just forking around the law. So to the extent that there are simple contracts where you can actually use some sort of decentralized mediator arbitration system, And that, if that's more efficient and leads to greater efficiency gains, you would think over the long term that that's what would happen. But the end result for a state or a government or a court is that you're getting worked around. I mean, that's basically what's happening. We can't get justice here. We can't order our private affairs using these traditional means, so we're going to resort to trustful source code in order to do that. And there's lots of details in there, but I think you could see a trend like that emerging.
One of the things here is that even if you look at the entire blockchain space, in the scope of real-world commerce, it's impossibly small. And so there's not a huge incentive for a lot of governments to spend a whole lot of time on crypto generally, much less get to the level of smart contracts, which is very emergent technology. And so I seriously doubt that we'll see much movement on this for the next 3 to 5 years. If we see the things like probably all of us up here are trying to accomplish, all of us on the industry side are trying to accomplish at least. If we see some of those start to come to fruition, then maybe the game would play. But generally, the law follows the market more so than leads the market. So.
Well, in the first panel, you mentioned a thing called transmission of title, if you remember. And that's exactly what I'm down to. If you have to, or you're about to transmit a title to anybody in a civil law country, you don't know what that means. If you want to form a company, you have to go through a notary, and that's about 300 years. And then go to the company house, is about 300 years again. So that's exactly what smart contracts and blockchain is all about. It's keeping these guys away from that line, and you have a company right away. And that's what I said before. With all my respect, you have to kill too many people along the way and shake it up, the whole structure of a civil law country. And that's why, back on what I said in the beginning, we're pretty far from that, or how to do this properly, in my point of view.
Certainly
Thank you, anyway.
Yeah, certainly the jurisdictional and enforcement problems are not new for blockchain. This has been coming for the last 20 years in the internet, the e-commerce, with digital rights. So, these are, I think that with enforcement jurisdiction, we need to kind of look at the larger context of how we are changing as a global community, how lines are being blurred, how enforcement is actually happening. And there's some really interesting experiments going on with Estonia, for example, and digital citizenship, with the migration of companies to favorable jurisdictions. I think you're going to see more and more of kind of self-selecting communities forming that are enforced perhaps more by contract law than geographical limits. So it'll be fascinating. And please thank these panelists for their knowledge. And we're going to break for lunch now. Thank you. You guys are